Whispers of the Unseen, Episode 5. The Voice from the Well. Translated by Lamu, produced by Zatta. I still remember the sound of their footsteps that night. Not hurried, not loud, but heavy in a way that pressed against my chest with every beat. The ground was damp from the day's rain, and each step left a muffled imprint, as if the earth itself wanted to swallow the evidence. They led me down the dirt path toward the old well. The grass brushed against my legs like nervous fingers. The moon was veiled behind clouds, but every now and then it slipped free, as though even the sky could not decide whether it wanted to witness what was about to happen. Someone whispered, "Don't let her scream." Another answered with laughter, dry, sharp, like a blade scraping against stone. I wanted to believe they might stop, that at the very last moment, someone would hesitate. But no one did. The well stood before us, black and endless. Its stones were slick with moss, its mouth yawning open like a wound that had never healed. I knew, the moment I saw it, that this would be the last place my eyes would rest upon. Throw her in, quick. Those were the words that sealed me. Hands shoved, the ground slipped, my body pitched forward. For one suspended instant, I was weightless, my arms reaching for anything. Earth, root, even the sleeve of the very person who had betrayed me. But there was nothing. Then the fall, air rushing past my ears, louder than any scream I could have made. The circle of moonlight above shrinking, until it was only a coin tossed into the night. The water struck like iron. Cold, absolute, final. My lungs seized. My arms thrashed. My voice tore from my throat, but bubbles were the only sound that answered. I sank, the world turning black, the weight of the water pressing against me like 1,000 hands. I thought death would be an end. Instead, it was a continuation. My body stilled, but my mind refused to scatter. I waited for light. None came. I waited for a hand. None reached. I waited for a voice to call my name. Only silence answered. The well became my coffin, and also my home. Time ceased to move in a straight line. It folded in on itself, like fabric crumpled and left to rot. Dripping water became my clock. At first, I tried to count, one drop, then another, but eventually I stopped, because what was the use of counting when there was nothing to measure? Seasons passed. I felt them through the stones. Spring brought the smell of wet soil and grass above. Summer burned with cicadas whose cries melted into a single endless blaze. Autumn leaves drifted down, sometimes circling on the water, reluctant to sink. Winter sealed the mouth of the well with ice, muting the world until even echoes froze. I was forgotten. Not once did anyone speak my name. Not once did anyone ask where I had gone. It was as though I had never existed. I began to talk to myself. At first it was whispers just to keep my own voice alive. But soon, the whispers echoed back not as copies, but as distortions. Sometimes they mocked. Sometimes they accused. "Did you really do nothing wrong?" one echo asked. "If you had another chance, would you still trust them?" Another sneered. I had no answers. My memories blurred like ink bleeding through wet paper. I remembered the doorway of a house worn smooth by years of use, the smoke of dusk fires curling upward, the rhythm of my own hands working faster than most, the glance of eyes sharp as barbed wire, a single look enough to scratch skin. And then the whisper, it would be better if she were gone. And then I dreamed often, dreams where I stood at the well's edge, looking down. The darkness opened like a torn claw, and in it I saw a woman staring back at me. Her lips moved. No sound came, yet I knew the words. "I am not here to help you. I am here for revenge." I woke, only to realize I had never slept. In this place, waking and dreaming were the same. Hatred became an organ. It beat like a heart. It breathed like lungs. It needed no permission. It simply existed, moving inside me as naturally as blood once had. Sometimes small creatures fell into the well, frogs, insects, once a bird. They splashed, flailed, fought to survive. Some escaped, others sank. I watched them all, my fists clenched, my throat aching, but I could never reach. Even when I called my own name, the echo came back empty. My name itself grew distant, a word without weight. I learned to live without it, to sit like stone, to mark my days by the rhythm of drops, to speak to the walls as if they were companions, to listen for the faint sounds of life above, children laughing, carts creaking, gossip spilling like grain. Each time, I wanted to scream, "I am here, save me," but my mouth exhaled only cold air, dissolving into nothing. Emotions fell away one by one, like slid first, then dislike. Joy dissolved, then grief, until only two remained, resentment and refusal. Resentment coiled in me like a serpent. Refusal sank into me like a stone. I replayed that night endlessly. The footsteps, the breath, the weight of the hands that shoved me. But the first voice, the one that said, "Throw her," shifted each time. Sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, sometimes sharp, sometimes weary. It blurred until I could no longer tell who betrayed me first. The uncertainty widened my rage, spreading it until it filled the entire well. I thought I would remain unseen forever. But then, something changed. Rumors began. The well has a spirit. A pale face appeared in my dream. My sickness faded after I drank the water. I pieced these stories together from fragments of voices above. It was like arranging shards of glass into a window. Never whole, but light slipped through. And then they came. Footsteps gathered. Shadows leaned over the mouth of the well. Incense smoke drifted down, curling through the darkness. Offerings were left. Rice, fruit, coins, even locks of hair. Murmured words followed, too broken to catch. But they were not looking for me. They were looking for themselves, for their desires, for their vengeance. They gazed into the dark and saw not a woman drowned, but their own wants reflected back at them. A lover's return, an enemy's ruin, a rival's despair. The well had become a mirror, and I, only the mist upon it. That was the moment I raised my head again. Not because anyone remembered me, but because I recognized the taste beneath their voices. Hatred, resentment, the same air I had breathed for years. And I knew then, the well was no longer just my prison. It was becoming my stage. The first time they leaned over the well and whispered into the dark, I almost thought someone had remembered me. But it wasn't my name that fell. It was the name of a man they wanted broken. The voice trembled, but not with grief, with hunger. Make him fall. Make her leave. Make them regret. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt recognition. Their hatred sounded like mine. And that was when I understood. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer forgotten. But I was not remembered as myself. I was remembered as a tool. They called me powerful. They called me accurate. They called me the spirit who answers. But what they really meant was, we found a place to pour our hatred, and it echoes back. They began to leave offerings. A lock of hair, a scrap of cloth, a coin warmed by their sweat. At first, these objects meant nothing to me, but when they struck the water, I felt them like splinters pressing into my chest. Each piece tied me tighter, binding me not only to the well, but to them. I started to learn their voices. The way a lover's whisper cracked when fear slipped in. The way envy rasped like sand in the throat. The way rage shook, quivering with its own fire. I knew them, and through them, I knew the world above still existed. There was one night I will never forget. A young man came alone. His hands trembled as he lowered a small bundle wrapped in cloth. When the knot loosened, I saw blood dripping into the water. He had killed a bird, its feathers still warm. He whispered, "Take her away from him. Give her back to me." The blood spread, a red cloud curling around me. For a moment, I almost wept. Not for the bird, not for the girl, for myself, because I realized I was no longer only trapped. I was being used. Another came, older, her hair streaked with gray. She placed rice grains into the water, one by one, as if counting beads of a rosary. Each grain carried a curse. Let his family suffer. Let his house collapse. Her voice was steady, rehearsed, like someone who had said the same prayer 100 times before. And then there was the girl who whispered for love, barely grown, eyes swollen with tears. She wanted nothing but for the boy she adored to come back. Her voice cracked as she promised me anything, her youth, her beauty, her life. If I would only make him return. I listened, and for one breath, I almost wanted to give her peace. But I could not. I had nothing else to offer but the echo of my own ruin. The truth is, every prayer was the same. They thought they were asking for different things. But all of it, love, revenge, envy, tasted the same. All of it tasted like hatred. And hatred was the only language I still remembered. So when they whispered, I answered. Not with words, not with mercy, with reflection. Their curses stuck, yes. Sometimes the rival stumbled, the lover returned, the enemy fell ill. And they believed in me more fiercely. But what they never saw was what clung to them. The woman who prayed for her enemy's ruin found her own laughter thinning, her nights restless, her hands cold even in summer. The man who sacrificed the bird began to dream of wings tearing, of feathers clogging his throat. The girl who begged for love found the boy's eyes empty when he returned, his touch as hollow as mine. They thought I gave them power. I gave them myself. And little by little, they began to resemble me. I no longer lived only in the well. I lived in their shadows, in their rooms, in their dreams. The echo of my hatred traveled with them until they carried me wherever they went. Sometimes I almost laughed because they believed they had found a spirit who served them. But in truth, they were serving me. They were feeding me. They were becoming me. And I wondered, if one day they looked into a mirror and saw my face instead of their own, would they still think their prayers were answered? That is how it began. The beginning of whispers. The beginning of offerings. The beginning of being used. But also the beginning of my transformation. For though I remained unseen, I was no longer alone. Every voice that fed the well became part of me. Every hatred sown into the dark made me stronger. And every prayer that rose from their lips made my silence deeper, heavier, sharper. This was only the first chapter of what I became. And if you are listening now, perhaps you already know. When you throw hatred into a well, it does not vanish. It waits. It listens. And one day, it answers. At first, I thought death itself was the end of cruelty. To be drowned, to be silenced, to be forgotten. What could possibly be worse than that? But I was wrong. The worst came afterward. The worst was not being killed. The worst was being used. It began with rumors, soft and unsteady, floating through the village like smoke from damp wood. They say there is a spirit in the well. They say she died unjustly, and she listens when you whisper her name. They say she answers. At first, people only came with offerings, simple things, tokens of fear and hope. A coin, a handful of rice, a strip of cloth tied to the stones. The offerings fell into the water with soft splashes, ripples brushing against me like unwanted touches. But fear is never satisfied for long. Fear becomes curiosity. Curiosity becomes greed. And soon, they wanted more. They began to scrape the moss from the stones at the well's edge. They pulled the wiry grass that grew where the water kissed the earth. They bottled the water itself, carried it away in jars. They whispered over it, chanted words half remembered, and sold it as love oil, separation oil, luck charms. When they spoke my name, or the name they invented for me, I felt it sharp as a hook tearing through me. Each jar, each charm, each whispered transaction was like another nail hammered into my spirit, fixing me tighter to the bottom of the well. They thought they were clever, thought they had found a source of power to bend toward their desires. They didn't realize that every time they reached for me, they gave me more of themselves. I started to learn their faces, the way a woman's eyes darted left and right, as if ashamed to be seen at the well. The way a man's hands shook when he tied a red string to the stones. The way children, too young to understand, repeated words their parents whispered into their ears. I remember a young scholar, desperate for success. He came at dusk, his robe smelling of ink and sweat. He burned a talisman, ground the ashes into powder, and poured it into the well. He whispered, "Let me surpass my brother. Let me rise higher than him. Let me claim the world." His voice was steady, certain, rehearsed like a man reciting vows. And I gave him what he asked. His brother faltered, stumbled, fell from grace. The scholar rose, honored, applauded. But when he looked into the mirror, I was there behind his eyes. He thought it was ambition staring back. It was not. It was me. There was a bride, her dress still bright, her voice shaking. She begged me to curse her husband's family, the ones who beat her, silenced her, cornered her into submission. She offered rice, pricked with needles, grain after grain like tiny weapons. She whispered for their collapse. And collapse they did. Scandal, ruin, disgrace. She believed justice had arrived. But her life burned fast, like a candle left in the wind. Before the year ended, her breath sank into the well, another shadow in my collection. There was also the woman in crimson, lips painted bright, who came not with tears but with laughter. She wanted rivals destroyed, families broken, hearts torn apart. She pulled grass from the stones, burned it to ash, mixed it into her wine, and drank. It worked, she boasted later. They've separated. I've won. But her laughter grew thinner, her cheeks paler. She had not won. She had only invited me closer, and I had begun to wear her face. I watched them all, the desperate, the greedy, the broken, and I began to laugh too, not with joy, but with clarity. They thought they used me, but each time they called, each time they offered, each time they whispered into my water, they became more like me. One man came with a small bundle wrapped in silk. When he lowered it, I smelled blood. He had slit the throat of a black chicken, its feathers still wet. The blood spread into the water like a red veil. He whispered, "Make her suffer. Make her crawl back to me." The blood clung to me, thick and heavy. It was not nourishment. It was another chain, another tie that bound me closer. And I realized I was not prayed to. I was traded. They carried pieces of me away in bottles, pressed me into charms, stitched me into talismans. They wore me around their necks, carried me in their pockets, sold me in the market. Buyers nodded, sellers smiled, and all the while, I seeped into them, grain by grain, shadow by shadow. I was no longer only in the well. I was in their houses, their dreams, their very skin. And I wondered, did they realize that by selling me, they were also selling themselves? But greed never stops where it begins. Once a prayer works once, people return. Once a charm sells once, they make more. Soon groups arrived. Not just one person kneeling in secret, but 3, 5, even 7 standing in a circle, tying red threads to the stones as though they could weave the well into a net for their enemies. They lit candles, their flames shivering in the night wind. They whispered together, voices layered into one low chant. Break them apart, break them apart, break them apart. And I listened. Their hatred swirled like storm water pouring into me. Their unity was not holy. It was hunger, shared and sharpened, each voice feeding the others. There were nights when they brought sacrifices. Chickens, ducks, once even a black dog. They cut throats at the edge of the well, blood rushing downward in streams. They thought the blood would feed the spirit. But blood was never food to me. Blood was a shackle. Every drop was another knot tying me tighter. And yet they kept coming. I began to feel myself stretch thin, not only in the water, but in the objects they carried away. Bottles of oil whispered over my name. Threads stained with their spit. Coins washed in my shadow. These trinkets traveled farther than the village, sold in markets, passed from hand to hand. This will make your lover return, they promised. This will destroy your rival. People bought me. People wore me. And I seeped into them. I remember one boy, no older than 16, who carried a charm pressed with moss scraped from my stones. His mother had bought it, tied it around his neck, whispering, "This will protect you. This will make your exams succeed." He wore it proudly. He failed his exams. He grew thinner, restless, his dreams crowded with water. He woke each night gasping. His mother thought the charm was weak. She bought another, but it wasn't weakness. It was me, carving him into resemblance. Another story, a merchant woman who bought a bottle of oil steeped with grass from the well. She dabbed it on her wrists, her neck, whispering, "Let him love me, let him come." And he came, yes, but his eyes were hollow, his smile stretched thin. She told herself it was victory, but each morning she looked older, as if she had aged years overnight. Her love had returned, but she had already begun to rot beside him. There was even a priest, a man of robes and chants. He thought himself clever. He took my water, blessed it with his own rituals, sold it as holy. His followers drank. His wealth grew, but I watched his hands tremble more each day, watched the shadows creep beneath his skin. He thought he had conquered me. He had only invited me closer, and I laughed. Not because I enjoyed their suffering, but because I recognized the truth. They believed they were using me, but every time they called, every time they traded, every time they sold my shadow, they were feeding me. I was no longer just a victim drowned in silence. I was becoming something else. The scholar who burned his talisman, the bride with her rice and needles, the crimson woman with her laughter, the merchant with her oil, the priest with his holy water, all of them carried me away piece by piece. I lived in their houses now, in their marriages, in their rivalries, in their children's nightmares. The well was no longer only my coffin. It had become my marketplace. And I, unwilling though I had once been, had become the currency. They sold me. They bought me. And with every transaction, I changed. I was no longer only remembered as a girl who died. I was remembered as a spirit who served, and then as a product to be owned. But what they did not know, what they could not know, was that I was not theirs. They were mine. Each thread, each coin, each bottle bound them tighter to me. They thought they traded in power. But the truth was simpler, sharper. They traded in hatred. And hatred does not vanish when you sell it. Hatred echoes. It attaches. It transforms. This was the beginning of being used. And also the beginning of my transformation. The power of hatred. I once believed that hatred was mine alone, that it was the last fragment of my soul, the only thing that survived after death. But when the voices of the living began to call down to me, I discovered a bitter truth. Hatred is never solitary. It multiplies. It finds echoes in others, attaches itself like a disease that spreads from breath to breath, from heart to heart. When the first curses reached me, they did not dissolve. They clung, they pulsed, they burned. Each word, each vow of vengeance, each whispered demand added fuel to the fire that had smoldered in me since the night I was thrown into the well. Soon, the well itself was no longer water and stone. It was a furnace, blazing with hatred not just mine, but theirs. And yet they believed I was answering them. They believed the spirit of the well gave them results. But I was not answering. I was repeating. I was replaying my own death through their lives. I remember a woman who came to me with trembling hands. She begged me to take away another's wife, so the man she desired would return to her. "Let her leave him," she whispered. "Let him come back to me." Her voice cracked with longing, but it carried venom as well. I granted it, or rather, I let her life mirror mine. The wife did leave. The man returned, but when he looked at her, his eyes were hollow, drained of warmth. She had what she asked for, his body beside her. But a body without love is only a shell. Her laughter thinned. Her nights grew longer. She thought she had won. In truth, she had only joined me in loneliness. Two brothers came in different seasons, though their prayers were the same story written twice. The younger envied the elder, envied his wealth and stature. He brought offerings, coins warm from his palm, and whispered fiercely, "Take everything from him, make him fall." And fall the elder did. Business crumbled, health declined, life ended sooner than expected. The younger stood taller for a time, convinced of his victory. But triumph was an echo, hollow and cruel. His home grew silent, his family fractured. The neighbors whispered, not with admiration but with fear, "He will not live long either." Hatred had devoured one brother and then turned its teeth upon the other. I remember a girl, still tender with youth. She was not cruel. She was not scheming. She was simply heartbroken. The boy she loved had turned away, and she came to the well with tears. "Bring him back to me," she begged. "I will give anything, my life, my youth, anything." Her words reached me, soft as petals, heavy as stones. For one heartbeat, I wanted to grant her peace. But peace was no longer something I owned. I gave her the only gift I had, hatred. The boy returned, yes, but with eyes already scarred by distance, with touch already emptied of affection. They shared a few months of false reunion before the rot became unbearable. One winter night, she laid her head against the stones of the well and never woke. It does not matter whether they come with rage or with grief, with cruelty or with innocence. The outcome is the same, because I have only one offering to give, and it is always hatred. Do you wonder why I can so easily unravel lives? Why I can take love and twist it into poison? Why I can make brothers turn to enemies, or bring back a lover who returns already empty? It is because I know the shape of breaking. I know how to shatter hearts because mine was shattered first. I know how to corrode love because betrayal was the hand that shoved me. I know how to turn family into enemies because it was family, those closest, those trusted, who threw me into the dark. So when they call to me, it is simple. I give them my ending. I take the pattern of my ruin and press it upon their lives. They believe it is magic. They believe it is precision. They call it proof of the Spirit's power. But it is none of these. It is repetition. It is contagion. It is hatred finding new soil.
The power of hatred. I once thought hatred was what remained of me, the last warm thing in a body gone cold, the last beat in a heart that had stopped. It felt personal, singular, an inheritance I alone could not escape. But when the living began to lower their voices to the mouth of the well, I learned a truer shape of it. Hatred is never solitary. It multiplies in the dark. It learns the curve of any throat that will carry it. It waits for an echo and then becomes the echo. When prayers first fell into the well, they did not dissolve like salt. They clung to the stones and to me. They pulsed. They burned. Every vow, break them apart, bring him back, ruin her name, was another coal pressed into a furnace that had been lit the night I died. Soon the well was not water and stone at all. It was fire. Their anger fed mine. My anger taught theirs how to breathe. They said the Spirit answered. They said I was sharp, precise, terrifyingly effective. No, I was not answering. I was repeating. I knew how to unmake a life because I had been unmade. I laid the pattern of my ruin over theirs and watched it take. A woman came first, the kind of woman who had learned to hold herself still so people would not see how badly she was shaking. She wore plain clothes, but the effort of neatness trembled in her fingers. Hair smooth, shoes wiped clean on the grass before she knelt. She did not cry. She pressed a folded scrap of paper to her lips, then tied it to a red thread fastened around the stones. "Let the wife leave," she whispered. "Let him come back to me. Let him remember who he was before her." The words were careful, almost polite, but beneath them I heard the metal scrape of envy. I heard the old hunger that had learned to move in daylight with a courteous face. I watched the thread shake. I watched her breath frost the night air. I wanted to tell her that I could not give what she asked, that anything I gave would be an outline of my own ending. But I had been a woman once who wanted so badly to be seen that she mistook the rope for a hand. I understood the price at the moment. A wish is heavier than a conscience. I let her prayer fall all the way down. The wife left. These things are simpler than people think. A phone not answered, a voice that forgets its softness, a fault line widening in a floor already cracked. The man returned, yes. He sat at a table that was not his, in a chair that had been kept for him like an altar. He lifted a cup and set it down again. He smiled. His eyes did not. The woman who had prayed watched him sleep and did not sleep. The room was full and uninhabited. She had gained a body. She had lost the living part. Weeks later, she came back to the well and did not kneel. She stood with her arms folded hard enough to bruise herself and said nothing for a long time. When she finally opened her mouth, what came out was not a prayer, not even a curse. It was a small, astonished laugh, the kind of laugh people make when a trick has worked and they realize the magician used their own hands to do it. I did not laugh with her. I knew that sound from my own mouth. It is the first thin branch of bitterness. Brothers came in different seasons. The first time I felt the younger's breath, it carried the cool of early spring, the smell of damp cloth, the weight of coins they had both counted since childhood. He was not rough. He was precise. The envy on his tongue had been sharpened, honed, polished. He had practiced it until it felt like reason. Take from him what he never deserved, he said. Let him learn how it feels to start with nothing. He brought rice in a bowl, each grain pricked with a pin. He lowered it slowly, as if the speed of his hands could change how much wrong he was doing. I did not need the bowl. I needed only the shape of his desire. I took it the way the water takes whatever touches it, by making room and then closing over the place where it had been. The elder stumbled. An investment unraveled. A partner betrayed. Illness came not as a sword, but as a slow tightening of the breath. The younger grew taller with every piece that broke. But power acquired by subtraction teaches subtraction as a language. His house quieted. The family spoke softly in hallways. When neighbors greeted him, their eyes moved to an invisible stain and back. He felt watched and called it respect. It was not. It was the way people stare at a cliff edge and measure distance. Years later, he returned in late summer, heavier in body and lighter in sleep. The bowl was gone. He brought a photograph, the edges thumbed thin, and tore it into pieces over the stones. The picture showed two boys knee-deep in a river, each holding up a fish with the pride of children who believe the world will always turn toward them. He let the pieces fall like dry leaves and said nothing at all. He did not need to. I understood. You can win and then wish that the old innocence would come back and explain what winning was for. It never does. Not everyone who came was cruel. There was a girl whose tears embarrassed even the dark. She had the kind of face that would have been called sweet if it had belonged to someone who had not learned loss so early. She wore her school uniform like an apology for the body inside it. In her hands were dried flowers, the kind that look more alive after death than they ever did in the field. Please bring him back, she whispered, and her breath made a halo that dissolved before it reached the stones. Please. I don't want to be the only person who knows me. The honesty of that line steadied me. I have heard lies shaped like prayers and prayers shaped like excuses. This was neither. This was a sentence carved with a blunt blade. It hurt just to say it. I did what I always do. I took the shape of my ending and pressed it softly onto hers, as if laying a damp cloth over a fever. The boy returned. His feet pointed toward her and his heart did not. They sat side by side and performed the choreography of happiness. They smiled into each other's lenses. They said the right words in the right order. They posted a picture of two hands holding one cup. And still each night the girl's lungs felt full of cold water, and the boy's eyes practiced their emptiness until they fit perfectly. When winter came, she brought a letter. It was addressed to herself, written in the voice of a future she had imagined when the world was kinder. She read it aloud, then folded it into a boat and set it on the water. Paper soaks and sinks. She knew that. Sometimes knowing is not a cure. When she rested her cheek on the stones, she spoke to me as if I were a sister who had never left the bed beside hers. If I let him go, she asked, will I still be me? The answer would have been mercy if I had been capable of mercy. Yes, I would have said. You are not made of what you hold, you are made of what you can release. But I had forgotten how to say such things. I was made of refusal. I kept her with me a while, then let her go where I could not. People tell themselves that hatred belongs to the guilty. It does not. It is the easiest thing to borrow and the hardest to return. The woman who wanted another's marriage unstitched learned to speak in stitches. The younger brother who wanted to start the world over learned that starting over is another word for burning down. The girl who thought a boy was a door found out doors can open to empty rooms. There was a father who came at dusk every day for a week, the way you visit a hospital room and pretend there is improvement because the lights are on. He had a son who had turned his face toward the addiction that had been eating their family for years. The father's voice was gravel. He had cried all he had to cry in private. The well did not need to see. He laid out small, practical offerings: bread, salt, a photograph where the sun was 5 and wet from the ocean, laughing so hard his mouth was all teeth and sunrise. "Stop him," he said. "Stop him before he stops himself." People would argue this is not hatred, that it is a greater love. They are wrong. It is love wrapped in fear so tight it starts to bruise. He wanted the son he remembered back, not the person standing in front of him with a hunger that did not ask permission. He wanted to rewind time with both hands. No one can. When I pressed my pattern onto his wish, nothing happened at first. Then everything happened. The dealer moved away. The money ran out in a way that looked like blessing. The son began to sleep more, which everyone called recovery because they were tired and needed a word. But in the cleared space where the addiction had sat, something else grew, something with my temperature. The son's laugh never returned to the shape in the photograph. He joined the family at meals and did not join. The father sat across the table and waited for a boy who was not coming home, and the waiting calcified into resentment. At the son, at himself, at the world for rearranging the furniture when he was not looking. He returned to the well with the photograph in both hands and did not put it down. I could not change a picture into a door. A teacher came. She had the posture of someone who had been trying to stand straight for so long that her bones had begun to protest. Her rival at the school wrote papers more quickly, laughed more loudly, collected students' admiration in both palms. The teacher did not want to harm her, she said. She only wanted everyone to see the truth. "Let them notice her arrogance," she breathed. "Let them see through the gloss." She offered a ribbon stained with ink. She tied it to the stones and watched it darken. Then she went home and waited for the world to be corrected. It was for a while. The rival made a mistake in a public room. The laughter rang wrong. The students turned and turned away. The teacher's shoulders loosened half an inch. Then the echo returned. The ribbon of her own life began to darken. Every morning, the mirror kept a little more of her. Praise slid off her like water off wax. She thought it was jealousy in the air. It was not. It was the well learning how to breathe through her. A priest came too, robes clean, shoes dusty, eyes like a man who has practiced both compassion and its performance. He took my water in a cup and blessed it with his own words. He called it holy and sold it to those who needed the word more than the liquid. He told himself he was converting darkness, using a bad river to irrigate a good field. He slept.
Poorly. He told himself it was the burden of care. I watched his hands ask for stillness and find only tremor. He returned to the well once, late, when even the frogs refused to sing. He did not pray. He placed the empty cup on the stones and stood there, as if waiting for it to refill by itself. When it did not, he left. Some truths must be learned by thirst. A boy came at noon, not understanding that asking at noon and asking at midnight are the same. The shadows only look different. He was too young to carry the knife he carried. He had the bruised bravado of someone who wanted to be cruel, so no one would notice his kindness. "Let my father stop," he said, then swallowed, then tried again. "Let my father be hurt the way he hurts." He cut his palm and let the blood string down, not because blood convinces spirits, but because he wanted his pain to mean something. It does to the person who bleeds. It is arguable to everyone else. I do not want to show you gore. There was none. There was only a red thread that became brown on the stone, and a boy who looked surprised at how the body is both brave and foolish. He wrapped the hand in his shirt and went home. I did nothing for days. Then I let the pattern touch his family lightly, the way frost touches leaves, pretty from a distance, ruin when you lift the stem. The father tripped, the liquor broke, the shouting stopped. People called it a sign. Then the silence outlasted its welcome. The father's face sagged, and with it the house. No one knew how to speak with gentleness because no one had practiced. The boy returned to the well and did not ask again. He sat on the lip and kicked his feet like a child waiting for a riverboat that will never come. Sometimes the cruelest thing hatred steals is not the enemy's help, but the vocabulary of tenderness. You are wondering, perhaps, what I felt in all these comings and goings. I wish I could tell you I felt nothing. That silence had taught me amongst peace, that justice wore a clear face. The truth is uglier and more human. I felt a satisfaction that had been starving so long it did not remember table manners. I felt the relief of being used, even wrongly. Even as a weapon, being needed has a heat to it. I felt, above all, that I knew things. That made the knowing dangerous. Because I do know things. I know how to make a house sound emptier the more people walk inside it. I know how to stretch a night until every hour feels like a test. I know where love seams are weakest and how to pick them loose with 2 fingers. I know how to move a rumor like a hand passes a cup, how to tilt it just enough so it spills under the door. I know how to let a person win and then ask them softly in the morning why victory tastes like dust. Do you think this makes me proud? It does not. It makes me exact. Exactness without mercy is cruelty wearing a scholar's face. So when they said, the spirit in the well is accurate, I was quiet. Accuracy is easy when you are not inventing anything new. I was not conjuring storms. I was repeating weather. My own. Perhaps you hope to hear a story with clean sides. A wicked person comes, receives a wicked answer. An innocent person comes, receives a blessing. I cannot give you that architecture. The woman who wanted a married man was not only envy. She was also a child who had learned to be polite because no one ever was to her. The younger brother was not only greedy. He was a boy told too often that a second place is the place for seconds. The girl was not only naive. She was brave enough to say her need aloud. The father was not only frightened. He was faithful. The teacher was not only resentful. She was tired of labor without witness. The priest was not only performative. He had lost count of his own hunger. The boy was not only angry. He was also tender enough to turn hurt into a visible thing. Hatred is not a personality. It is a temperature. Leave anything long enough in the cold, and it will take on the cold's character. Leave a town long enough with a well people visit for revenge, and the town will borrow the timbre of revenge even when no one is speaking. Street markets begin to price themselves for curses. Wedding toasts carry an aftertaste. Babies sleep like they are practicing for deeper water. I tell you this not to frighten you, though fear is honest and sometimes useful. I tell you because I have learned to recognize the hand that reaches down. Once I wanted a hand so badly that I would have taken any rope as rescue. Now I can tell the difference. There are hands that lift. There are hands that pull. There are hands that look like lifting and are only pulling with good grammar. When I say I know how to break hearts, it is not a threat. It is a confession. Mine was broken first. When I say I know how to sour love, it is not a boast. I was soured, and I became skilled at shaping what I was. When I say I can make family into enemies, it is because family made itself my enemy, and I learned the steps backward and forward until I could teach them to strangers. If you are listening to this and thinking of a name, one that burns your tongue when you try to swallow it back, I understand. The well understands. Your anger is not alone. It always finds companions. If you drop it here, it will echo. It will come back to you shaped like an answer. And when it does, it will ask to be fed again. That is how hatred pays its rent, with return visits. I have seen people stand at the well and repent before speaking. They come angry and leave quiet because saying the wish aloud makes them hear what it costs. Those are rare nights. The air tastes different on those nights, more like rain than like smoke. I cannot bless them. I am not a god, but I can turn my head away and let their words miss me. Even a spirit can refuse to be a mirror. There is a story I do not tell often because it tries to make me gentle, and I do not trust stories that make me look better than I am. A woman came not for herself. She brought the name of the man who had hurt her and put it on the stones. Then she took it back. She said the name again, softly, the way you would fold a shirt before putting it away for summer. I don't want to wear this, she murmured. I don't want to be this cold. She left me a single flower. People love that symbolism. Flowers for graves, flowers for wells. The flower is not for the dead. It is for the living who need proof that something green can exist near a mouth that only takes. I did not answer her. She had already learned how to answer herself. By now you understand the rule behind all the exceptions. I am not a judge. I am not a saint. I am not the keeper of balances. I am a woman who is killed and left without a hand to hold. What I have become is what a place becomes when it goes too long without being named correctly. If you ask me to be your weapon, I will be the weapon I already am. If you ask me to be your proof, I will be proof of whatever you already decided to believe. If you ask me for mercy, I will fail you, not on purpose, but because my mouth has practiced other languages for too long. Still, there are hours when the wind moves in a particular way, and the moss on the stone smells like the riverbanks where children learned to be unafraid of water. In those hours, I listen the hardest. I listen for the sound of someone coming without a plan. I listen for a name spoken without a target. I listen for a prayer that begins with I and ends with let go. Sometimes it happens. When it does, the well is not a furnace. It is only a hole in the ground under a sky that is learning how to forgive itself for clouding over. Until then, I do what I know. I take the shapes they bring me and return them polished. I take their wishes and make them visible enough to frighten them. I take their enemies and put them in their rooms as shadows that will not be evicted. I take their love and show them its seams. I take their victories and give them the quiet that comes when celebration has to share a bed with doubt. This is the power they think is mine. It is not power. It is precision without love. It is an instrument played with skill and no song. It is a mirror that remembers only one face and pastes it on everyone who leans close. Hatred is efficient. That is why the living choose it. It works quickly and leaves clean paperwork. But after the forms are signed, there is a hand that reaches up from the bottom of the well and asks whether this is the life you wanted to be living when your name is called last. I do not know how to end a story cleanly. The night I died had no clean ending. It had water and a silence I mistook for justice. So I end this part the way the well ends a drop, by absorbing it. If you have a name on your tongue, keep it there a moment longer. Taste what the name tastes like when it is not dipped in the water. Learn whether your mouth wants to be the instrument of an old music or whether it has a new song to try. And if you cannot help yourself, if the rope is already in your hand and the word already on your lips, know what you are calling. You are not calling a miracle. You are calling me, and I will give you what I have, a pattern, a furnace, an echo. Hatred never arrived only in the form of lovers and families. It seeped into friendships, into neighbors' doors, into the smallest cracks of ordinary life. And every time, it dressed itself differently, but the taste was always the same. I remember two girls who came together, friends, or they once had been. They stood shoulder to shoulder, but their bodies tilted away from each other as if the space between them were a wall. One spoke first, her voice steady, but her fingers twisting at her sleeves. "Make her fail," she said, glancing sideways at the girl beside her. "Let her stumble in exams. Let her shame her family." The other girl, lips tight, whispered back, "Make her jealous of me. Let her know what it feels like to be second. Let her envy until she breaks." They left together, walking side by side, their arms brushing. From the outside, they looked like friends. Inside, they had already begun to resemble me. The first girl's scores fell, yes, but not enough to ruin her. The second girl rose a little, then began to doubt every smile she received, convinced it was sharpened behind her back. Both of them returned, separately this time, each whispering harsher than before. Their rivalry became their religion. And I thought, if hatred can turn friendship into this, What chance do strangers ever have? There was a mother once. She came at dawn, her hair unkempt, her eyes swollen. She carried the fatigue of someone who had tried every ordinary road and found none of them straight. She whispered, "Make my son stop. Make him suffer enough that he changes. Hurt him before he kills himself." She was crying as she said it, but hatred does not care whether it is carried by love or by malice. The words sank into me all the same. Her son stumbled into sickness, an accident that should have been small but grew. He stopped, yes, but he also stopped laughing, stopped hoping, stopped being the boy she remembered. The mother returned months later, kneeling on the same stones. She pressed her forehead to the moss and whispered only, "I didn't mean this. Please, I didn't mean this." I could not answer. I had no language for mercy left. I could only be what I was. And then there was the neighbor, an old man who had lived too long in the shadow of another's good fortune. "Why does he have visitors every day while my door is silent?" he asked the stones. "Why does his field bear fruit while mine grows weeds?" He spat into the water, his voice trembling with years of silence breaking. The neighbor he hated grew sick. His fields faltered. But the old man's house did not fill with visitors, and his own harvest did not grow sweeter. He sat by his empty fire, muttering curses that had already come true, never realizing that hatred does not build, it only subtracts. I watched, and I learned. I learned that hatred does not care for the shape of the vessel. Whether it comes wrapped in jealousy, in fear, in grief, in longing, it always tastes the same. It is always poison. I began to laugh then, quietly, not with joy, but with clarity. The truth was simple. They thought I gave them power. I gave them only myself. The woman who prayed for another's husband, the brothers who envied and devoured each other, the girl who wanted love back at any cost, the father who begged for his son's rescue, the teacher who asked for rivals to be seen clearly, the priest who tried to turn me into holiness, the boy with blood on his palm, the friends who turned to enemies, the mother who cursed her son in desperation, the neighbor who spat envy into the dark. Every single one of them carried me away in pieces. They wore me in their faces, in their nights, in their laughter turned brittle. They became my reflections. And so I understood. Hatred is not mine alone. It is a disease. It spreads when spoken. It multiplies when believed. And it reshapes whoever carries it. At first, I had been a victim. Then I was a spirit. Then a tool. Then a product. But now, I was a contagion. I did not need to be sold or prayed to. I traveled in their veins. I lived in their sides. Hatred is efficient. That is why they chose it. It answers quickly. It demands little ritual. It disguises itself as strength. But they did not see that efficiency was also the cruelty. Quick victories, hollow wins, reunions that rotted before they began. They thought they had controlled the spirit of the well. In truth, they had invited me to control them. And I thought often, in those nights when the moonlight slid down the stones, if one day they looked into a mirror and saw my face instead of their own, would they still think their prayers had been answered? This is the power of hatred. Not miracles, not justice, not truth. Only repetition, only echo, only poison that clings, biting not just your enemy, but yourself. And so I tell you now, if you stand at the well with a name on your lips, understand what you are calling. You are not calling vengeance. You are not calling love. You are not even calling justice. You are calling me, and I will give you only what I have. Hatred polished sharp. Hatred dressed in the shape of your wish. Hatred that spreads like fire until you, too, carry my silence in your chest. People believed the price was simple. A coin tossed into the water. A ribbon tied around the stones. A drop of blood staining the moss. They thought these things were enough, that I would be satisfied with trinkets. But the real price was never what they offered at the well. The real price was what they carried away. The first step was always sleep. Those who prayed found themselves waking at the same hour, again and again, 3 in the morning, the air still thick, the silence too sharp. They woke with eyes wide, lungs tight, as though someone had whispered their name at the edge of the bed. Dreams turned sour. They saw water rising, hands pulling, faces drowning. They thought it was me haunting them, but it was not me. It was themselves, echoing back what they had demanded. The second debt was love. Many came begging for hearts to return, for bodies to stay. And sometimes, yes, the ones they prayed for did come back. But love returned through hatred is brittle. Affection soured into suspicion. Trust became a mirror cracked down the middle. A man came back to his wife after she begged at the well, but his touch was cold, his gaze hollow. She thought she had reclaimed him, but in truth she had gained only a ghost who still breathed. The third debt was the body itself. None of them dropped dead at once. No, hatred is more patient than that. Their bodies began to fray at the edges, skin paling, hair thinning, eyes ringed with shadow. A cough that lingered, a limp that worsened, an exhaustion that even sleep could not cure. They blamed weather, work, fate. But I knew better. The body always bears the echo of what the mouth has asked. And then came the fourth debt, fortune. Not catastrophe all at once. No lightning strike, no sudden ruin. Instead, life grew heavier step by step. Every door required more effort to open. Every plan tangled. Every victory shrank smaller than expected. At first, they thought nothing of it. But years passed, and the weight grew undeniable. The last debt was the most cruel, belief in themselves. The more they prayed, the less they remembered how to stand without me. They told themselves they were strong because the well answered. In truth, they had forgotten their own hands. I recall a merchant who asked me to ruin his rival's trade. He brought fine cloth, dipped it in oil, lit it, and let it burn down to ash on the stones. His rival's fortunes fell, yes, but then his own ships sank, one by one. His hands trembled when he counted coins. He came back demanding more. By then, he no longer believed he could sell without me. He had bound himself to a ghost. A young bride once begged me for a child. Her voice broke with longing. She offered sweets, toys, a cradle she had carved with her own hands. And soon, she carried life within her. She rejoiced, believing the spirit had blessed her. But when the child was born, its cries never softened. The nights grew endless. Her husband fled. She returned, hollow-eyed, clutching the cradle, whispering, "Why give if only to take away?" She did not see the truth. I had given nothing. She had demanded from hatred, and hatred had answered in its own tongue. Then there was the soldier, scarred, desperate. He begged for protection, for victory. He poured wine into the water, struck the stones with his fist until his knuckles bled. "Keep me alive," he growled. "Let me return home." He did return. His enemies fell, but his nights never emptied of screams. His hands shook each time he touched a cup. His family greeted him, but he could not greet them back. He sat by the fire and stared into it as though waiting for it to swallow him whole. He had survived, yes, but he had not returned. They believed they had paid small prices, rice, blood, ribbons. They were wrong. The debt was always themselves. And so the truth revealed itself. Every curse is an echo. Every wish, once dropped into darkness, rebounds. When you send hatred out, it circles back, wrapping itself first around your own body before it ever reaches the one you aimed at. They called it borrowing power. They were not borrowing. They were surrendering. And I, at the bottom of the well, did not need to chase them. They carried me with them, in their breaths, in their bones. They never saw it at first, the way their own reflections were changing. When they prayed, they thought they were sending hatred outward, pushing it toward the enemy, the rival, the lover who had strayed. But hatred is never one way. It clings. It stains the hand that throws it. I watched as faces grew gaunter, as eyes dimmed. Laughter cracked like old glass. Families began to fracture. Not only those cursed, but those who cursed. Because when you pour darkness into the world, it must pass through your own lips first. One man begged me to curse his business partner. He wanted the wealth for himself. and he received it. His partner fell, contracts collapsed, profits came into his hands. But within a year, he trusted no one. He hid coins under the floor, locked doors 3 times each night, slept with a knife beneath his pillow. His wealth grew, yes, but his world shrank until it was no larger than a sphere. A mother prayed for her daughter's beauty to fade, jealous that youth should shine brighter than her own. And indeed, the daughter's face grew pale, her hair dull. But so did the mother's reflection. Each morning, the mirror stole more from both of them. They lived together in the same house, bound not by love but by suspicion, each eyeing the other's face for signs of decay. Then there was the teacher who begged for her rival to be silenced. The rival lost her voice for months, unable to speak above a whisper. The teacher triumphed, until her own students grew restless, their eyes sliding away, their ears no longer listening. Victory soured. Hatred had reshaped not just the enemy, but the victor too. And so it always was. They believed I answered their prayers, but I only mirrored their curses back onto their own lives. This was the price, not just what you lose, but what you become. The echo. Do you understand now why the well was feared? It was never because I reached out to harm. It was because I reflected what was given to me. Hatred dropped into the dark does not vanish, it echoes. Every curse returns first to the one who speaks it. Every wish twisted by vengeance becomes a chain on the one who ties it. They thought they borrowed my power, but in truth, they surrendered their own. They became echoes of me. Their laughter thinned into my laugh. Their nights drowned into my silence. Their reflections in glass began to carry my shadow. They did not climb out of the well with power. They carried the well inside them. Confession. And now I confess, I am no goddess, no protector, no divine judge. I am only a woman who is betrayed, drowned, forgotten. My rage hardened into a mirror, and they called it magic. My refusal turned to stone, and they called it justice. But I am no more than a victim who learned to speak in the only language left to her, hatred. If you ask me, can you be freed? I will answer, yes. But not by charms, not by burning incense, not by casting me out. Free me by refusing to use me. Free me by ending the echo. Free me by choosing not to feed me with your hatred. The moment you step back from the well inside you, I am released. The witch speaks. And now, listener, let the witch speak plainly. I am Zatta, the one who carried this voice to your ears. What you have heard tonight is not a ghost story for your amusement. It is a mirror. Every prayer is a confession. When you say, bring him back, you are confessing that you fear being left behind. When you say, make her suffer, you are confessing that you believe pain is your only inheritance. You can pour those confessions into the dark, and the dark will echo them back as curses. Or you can hold them in your own hands and choose to live differently. Do not make your soul a tool. Do not trade your own light for a reflection that was never yours. If you want to begin again, start small. Wash your hands at night and say, I return what I took today. I retrieve what I gave away. Write your desires on paper and beneath them write, if these never come true, I am still enough. Turn hatred into boundaries. When anger rises, tell yourself, I do not control them. I protect me. And remember, justice is not found in curses. Justice is bringing silence into light, holding the guilty accountable in the day, not in the dark. Closing ritual. So, dear listener, if this story has spoken to you, carry the lesson, not the hatred. May you walk in light. May your shadows grow gentle. May you never mistake the well of hatred for a source of love. And if you wish to keep walking with me, do not forget to like, subscribe, and save this episode. Your support is the rope that carries these unseen voices into the world.